The Sermon on the Mount stands as one of the most significant teachings delivered by Jesus Christ, documented in the Gospel of Matthew, spanning chapters 5 through 7. This powerful discourse lays out the foundational principles of the Christian faith and introduces a revolutionary understanding of joy, righteousness, and God's kingdom. In this exploration, we'll delve into the opening of this transformative sermon, examining the context in which it was given, the renowned Beatitudes, and Jesus' challenge to his followers to become the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Prepare yourself for an exploration of words that altered the trajectory of human history and continue to provoke and uplift countless individuals to this very day. The context of this momentous teaching is outlined at the start of Matthew's 5th chapter. In the opening 2 verses, we discover that when Jesus observed the multitudes, he ascended to a mountainside and took a seat. His disciples gathered around him, and he commenced teaching them. Jesus selected an elevated location for his instruction, enabling a vast number of people to receive his words. The sermon opens with a collection of declarations called the Beatitudes. Each statement identifies a particular group of individuals whom Jesus pronounces as blessed, meaning fortunate or genuinely happy. These pronouncements offer a fresh viewpoint on who truly receives favor in God's sight. The opening beatitude appears in Matthew 5-3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus isn't referring to material destitution here, but rather to spiritual modesty. He's instructing that those who acknowledge their dependence on God are the very ones who will genuinely encounter the kingdom of heaven. Moving forward to verse 4, Jesus proclaims, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." This might appear paradoxical, yet Jesus is conveying that individuals who experience grief over wrongdoing and the world's injustices will receive divine comfort. The Beatitudes progress, with each one confronting prevailing ideas about what constitutes happiness and achievement. Jesus addresses the meek, individuals who hunger and thirst for what is right, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, and those facing persecution for righteousness. In every instance, he pledges a particular blessing. For instance, in Matthew 5-5, Jesus proclaims, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Within this framework, meekness doesn't signify weakness, but instead represents controlled strength. Jesus is conveying that those who display gentleness and humility, placing their trust in God rather than their own power, will obtain a spiritual inheritance. Another significant beatitude is located in verse 6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Jesus is describing an intense longing for both individual and collective righteousness. He assures that this yearning will be fulfilled. The Beatitudes reach their conclusion with particular attention to persecution. In Matthew 5:10-12, Jesus states, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." These statements served as both a caution and a source of encouragement. Jesus was readying his followers to encounter resistance, while simultaneously assuring them that such persecution would serve as evidence of their devotion and would yield eternal rewards. Following the Beatitudes, Jesus proceeds to discuss the function of his followers within the world. He employs 2 striking metaphors, salt and light. In Matthew 5:13, Jesus declares, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot." In the ancient world, salt served to preserve food and amplify taste. Jesus is instructing that his followers must exert a preserving and purifying influence on society, preventing moral corruption and enriching life. Right after this, in Matthew 5:14-16, Jesus introduces another metaphor. "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Light fulfills several purposes. It brightens, directs, and makes things visible. Jesus is teaching that his followers must conduct themselves in a manner that demonstrates the path to God for others, unveils truth, and brings moral understanding to their surroundings. It's crucial to recognize that the objective of being light isn't to attract attention to oneself, but rather to bring glory to God. These metaphors concerning salt and light underscore the obligation that Jesus' followers possess to create a positive impact on the world surrounding them. They shouldn't withdraw from society, but should participate actively within it, contributing the essence and brilliance of God's kingdom. It's essential to understand that Jesus isn't offering these concepts as mere suggestions or alternatives. He's declaring the actual nature of what his followers represent: salt and light. The real question isn't whether they ought to be salt and light, but rather whether they're genuinely fulfilling that calling. As he wraps up this portion of the sermon, Jesus lays down a crucial foundation for what it means to be his follower. He reconstructs the definitions of happiness and success through the lens of God's kingdom, highlighting characteristics like humility, meekness, mercy, and purity of heart. He also clarifies that following him won't be simple and might even result in persecution. Simultaneously, Jesus presents his followers with an elevated vision of their purpose in the world. They aren't meant to be merely passive observers, but active representatives of God's kingdom, commissioned to preserve goodness, add richness to existence, and shine light on the path for others. With this groundwork established, Jesus was prepared to guide his audience deeper into his teachings, tackling practical matters concerning how to live in accordance with these kingdom principles. After laying out the Beatitudes and highlighting his followers' function as salt and light, Jesus turned to an important subject: his connection to the law of Moses. Many within the gathering probably questioned whether Jesus was introducing a new religion meant to supersede the traditional Jewish customs. Jesus directly addressed this worry in Matthew 5:17 through 18. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Truly, I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished." Through these words, Jesus validated the continuity connecting his teachings with the Hebrew Scriptures. He didn't arrive to demolish the law, but to bring it to completion. This signifies that Jesus came to disclose the authentic meaning and intention of the law, carrying it to its logical and spiritual fulfillment. Jesus then delivered a startling declaration in Matthew 5:20. "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." The Pharisees and teachers of the law had a reputation for their rigorous adherence to religious regulations. How could anyone possibly possess a righteousness exceeding theirs? The resolution rests in how Jesus understood the law. He revealed that genuine obedience extends beyond merely external behaviors to include internal dispositions. To demonstrate this principle, Jesus offered multiple examples, beginning with the commandment prohibiting murder. In Matthew 5:21 through 22, Jesus stated, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder,' and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." Jesus wasn't dismissing the significance of the prohibition against murder, but he was demonstrating that the source of murder, which is anger and hatred, is equally sinful from God's perspective. Jesus went on by stressing the significance of reconciliation. "Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift." Matthew 5:23 through 24. Here, Jesus is conveying that proper relationships with one another hold greater importance than religious ceremonies. Subsequently, Jesus tackled the subject of adultery. Once more, he moved past the outward action to address the attitudes of the heart. In Matthew 5:27 through 28, he stated, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." This interpretation of the law was groundbreaking. Jesus was conveying that purity extends beyond just actions to encompass thoughts and longings. He was summoning his followers to a more profound level of holiness that originates in the heart. Jesus then employed forceful language to stress the gravity of sin. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. Matthew 5:29. It's vital to comprehend that Jesus wasn't promoting actual self-harm, but was using exaggeration to emphasize the significance of treating sin seriously and taking whatever measures are needed to steer clear of it. Jesus also spoke to the matter of divorce, once again elevating the standard beyond what was typically practiced during that era. He declared in Matthew 5:31 through 32, "It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery." Then Jesus addressed the topic of oaths. In the culture of that period, individuals frequently made sworn promises to guarantee the truthfulness of their statements. Jesus, however, taught that his followers ought to be so truthful that such sworn promises would be needless. In Matthew 5:33 through 37, he said, "Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." This instruction on truthfulness in communication is deeply meaningful. Jesus is summoning his followers to a standard of honesty so elevated that their straightforward words are adequate. There should be no requirement to strengthen the truthfulness of their declarations with sworn promises. Through these illustrations concerning anger, adultery, divorce, and oaths, Jesus was showing what he intended by fulfilling the law. He wasn't doing away with the commandments, but was unveiling their more profound significance and summoning his followers to an elevated standard of righteousness. Jesus was instructing that true obedience to God extends beyond merely outward behaviors to internal dispositions. He was summoning his followers to an inner transformation, not simply external compliance. This instruction must have presented a challenge for Jesus' audience. He was establishing a standard that appeared unattainable through human capabilities alone, and that was exactly his intention. Jesus was revealing the necessity for a fundamental transformation that could only occur through a connection with God. By understanding the law in this manner, Jesus was laying the groundwork for his own work of redemption. He was demonstrating that we all come short of God's standard and require his grace and pardon. After clarifying how the law must be satisfied not only outwardly but also inwardly, Jesus proceeded to tackle a topic that would profoundly challenge traditional concepts of justice and human relationships: loving one's adversaries. Jesus started this portion by referencing a widely recognized principle in Jewish law, frequently termed the law of retaliation. In Matthew 5:38, he stated, "You have heard that it was said, 'Eye for eye and tooth for tooth.' This law, present in the Old Testament, was initially designed to restrict retaliation and guarantee that consequences were equivalent to the violation. Nevertheless, Jesus was about to introduce an even more elevated standard. He proceeded in Matthew 5:39 through 42. "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." These statements must have astonished Jesus' audience. He was suggesting a response to injustice that contradicted all instinctive human reactions. Rather than retaliation, Jesus was teaching non-resistance and even generosity toward those who cause us harm. It's significant to grasp that Jesus wasn't promoting inaction when confronted with wrongdoing or rejecting the necessity for justice in society. Rather, He was instructing a fundamentally different approach to responding to personal injustice, an approach that possessed the capacity to disrupt the pattern of violence and revenge. Turning the other cheek doesn't imply merely tolerating mistreatment. It represents a peaceful form of standing firm that declines to descend to the level of the one causing harm, while upholding the human worth of both the one harmed and the one causing harm. In the same way, offering the coat together with the shirt, travelling 2 miles rather than 1, and lending without hesitation are all methods of responding to unfairness with unexpected generosity. These responses possess the capacity to change situations of conflict, catching the aggressor off guard with unanticipated kindness. But Jesus didn't conclude there. He extended this principle of peaceful love even further, applying it not solely to particular conflict scenarios, but to our adversaries in a broader sense. In Matthew 5:43-44, Jesus declared, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Once more, Jesus was challenging traditional ideas. While Jewish law stressed love for one's neighbor, it was typical in the culture of that time to view it as acceptable or even anticipated to harbor hatred toward one's adversaries. Jesus, though, was summoning his followers to love even those who harbored hatred and persecuted them. This instruction on loving adversaries represents one of the most unique and demanding elements of Jesus' teachings. He isn't simply requesting us to endure our adversaries or avoid causing them harm. He is summoning us to actively love them and offer prayers on their behalf. Jesus then clarified the rationale behind this extreme command. In Matthew 5:45-47 he stated, "That you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that?" Here, Jesus directs attention to God as the ultimate example of this manner of love. God bestows his kindness on everyone, irrespective of their moral standing. In the same way, Jesus' followers are summoned to exhibit a love that transcends the commonplace, a love that doesn't distinguish between ally and adversary. Jesus is challenging his audience to a quality of love that is markedly different from the world surrounding them. Loving solely those who return our love is nothing exceptional. Even the most corrupt individuals in society, such as tax collectors, practice that. The love Jesus is instructing is of an entirely different caliber. This manner of love isn't simple. In reality, it may appear unachievable through human capabilities alone. Loving our adversaries contradicts our innate impulses for self-protection and fairness. That's the reason Jesus links this love to our standing as children of your Father in heaven. This quality of love is only achievable when we comprehend and undergo God's unconditional love for us. Jesus wraps up this portion with an unexpected declaration in Matthew 5:48. "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." This perfection doesn't reference an unattainable moral flawlessness, but rather to wholeness or maturity in love. Jesus is summoning his followers to a love that mirrors God's nature, a love that is whole and creates no separation between ally and adversary. This instruction on extreme love and non-revenge represents one of the most unique characteristics of Jesus' teachings. It profoundly challenges our concepts of fairness, entitlements, and human connections. Jesus is offering a vision of a community changed by the love of God, a community that answers injustice and hatred not with additional violence but with unexpected and life-changing love. It's crucial to acknowledge that this instruction doesn't reject the existence of wrongdoing or the requirement for justice in society. Rather, it presents a fundamental approach to responding to wrongdoing that possesses the capacity to disrupt patterns of violence and change human connections. Throughout the course of history, numerous followers of Jesus have embraced this instruction earnestly, frequently with unexpected outcomes. From the early Christian martyrs who offered prayers for their tormentors to contemporary figures such as Martin Luther King Jr., who implemented Jesus' principles of peaceful resistance in the civil rights movement, this instruction has revealed its life-changing influence. Nevertheless, It's also among Jesus' most demanding teachings. Loving our adversaries, offering prayers for those who persecute us, answering violence with peaceful resistance, all of this contradicts our natural tendencies. It represents a summons to a manner of existence that is only achievable through profound inner change, a change that Jesus arrived to enable. As Jesus brought this segment of his sermon to a close, his audience must have understood they were being summoned to a fundamentally different manner of existence, a manner of existence that mirrored the very nature of God, marked by a love that goes beyond typical boundaries and possesses the capacity to change the world. After instructing about extreme love, Jesus directed his focus to the religious customs of his followers. He tackled three principal areas of Jewish spiritual life: giving to those in need, prayer, and fasting. In each instance, Jesus stressed the significance of proper motivation and practicing in private. Jesus started by addressing giving to those in need. In Matthew 6:1-4, he said, "Be careful not to practice your acts of righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." Jesus wasn't criticizing the practice of giving to those in need, but rather the incorrect motivation underlying it. He criticized individuals who made their contributions in a showy manner, pursuing public acknowledgement. Rather, Jesus instructed that giving ought to be conducted in private, concentrating on satisfying God rather than people. Subsequently, Jesus turned to the topic of prayer. In Matthew 6:5-8, he said, "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father, who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him." Once more, Jesus was underscoring the significance of proper motivation in prayer. He criticized individuals who prayed in public to make an impression on others, along with those who employed meaningless repetitions, believing they would be acknowledged for their abundant words. Rather, Jesus instructed that prayer ought to be a personal and genuine dialogue with God. Jesus then offered a pattern for prayer, recognized as the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6:9-13. This prayer includes worship, yielding to God's will, petitions for daily necessities, forgiveness, and safeguarding from evil. It serves as a pattern of prayer that is straightforward, direct, and centered on God. Lastly, Jesus addressed fasting. In Matthew 6:16-18, he said, "When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." Yet again, Jesus highlighted the significance of practicing in private. He criticized individuals who displayed their fasting, pursuing admiration from others. Rather, Jesus instructed that fasting ought to be a private practice between the person and God. In all these instructions, Jesus was highlighting a core principle. Genuine spiritual life is driven by a longing to satisfy God, not to make an impression on others. He was summoning his followers to a spirituality that is profound and authentic, not shallow and theatrical. Jesus also continually assured that the Father, who observes what is accomplished in private, will compensate those who practice their devotion in this manner. This doesn't necessarily indicate material compensation, but rather the profound fulfillment that arises from a genuine connection with God. These instructions from Jesus prompt us to scrutinize our own motivations in our religious customs. They summon us to a spiritual life that is focused on God, not on ourselves or the judgments of others. It represents a summons to genuineness and closeness with God rather than outward and shallow religious practice. As Jesus brought this segment of his sermon to a close, he was establishing a benchmark for spiritual existence that extended far beyond external customs. He was summoning his followers to an inner change that would appear in genuine and modest devotion to God. After tackling spiritual customs, Jesus shifted his focus to his followers' material worries and life priorities. In this portion of the Sermon on the Mount, he addressed core matters concerning where we invest our confidence and what we genuinely cherish. Jesus started this segment of his instruction with a compelling declaration about treasures. In Matthew 6:19-21, he stated, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Through these statements, Jesus was confronting the human inclination to pursue security and purpose in material belongings. He highlighted the transient and fragile character of earthly treasures, setting them in contrast with the endurance of heavenly treasures. It's significant to observe that Jesus wasn't denouncing all types of ownership or financial planning. Rather, he was cautioning against greedy hoarding and extreme confidence in material riches. The treasures in heaven Jesus mentioned are probably things of lasting worth, acts of love, generosity, fairness, and faith. Jesus then offered a meaningful observation. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. In other words, what we prize discloses and molds our priorities and nature. Jesus was summoning his followers to assess where they are investing their time, effort, and resources. Subsequently, Jesus employed a fascinating metaphor in Matthew 6:22-23. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? In this framework, the eyes probably refer to our outlook or manner of viewing the world. Jesus was instructing that the manner we perceive the world, our priorities and principles, influences our complete existence. If our vision is concentrated on proper things, heavenly treasures, our existence will be abundant with light. But if our vision is warped by avarice or materialism, our complete existence will be harmfully impacted. Jesus then offered a daring declaration in Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Here, Jesus personified money, or material belongings, as a competing master to God. He was indicating that money possesses the capacity to demand our allegiance and mold our priorities in a manner that rivals our commitment to God. Jesus was summoning his followers to establish a definite choice. Serving God must be our highest priority. After laying down this core principle, Jesus tackled a typical worry that frequently prevents us from completely trusting in God: concern about material requirements. In Matthew 6:25-34, Jesus stated, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they?" Jesus wasn't advocating recklessness or idleness. Rather, he was confronting the concern that frequently overwhelms us when we contemplate our material requirements. He directed attention to God's creation, the birds and the lilies, as illustrations of God's reliable provision. Jesus went on, "Can any one of you by worrying add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith?" Here, Jesus was underscoring the pointlessness of extreme worry. He wasn't suggesting we shouldn't labor or make plans, but that we shouldn't be overwhelmed with concern about what lies ahead. Rather, we are to place confidence in God's provision. Jesus then tackled the core of the matter. So do not worry, saying, "What shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." This stands as one of Jesus' most meaningful and demanding declarations. He was establishing a distinct priority for his followers. Pursuing God's kingdom and his righteousness ought to be our primary and most important concern. When we accomplish this, Jesus assures that our requirements will be satisfied. Pursuing God's kingdom signifies aligning our existence with God's principles and intentions. It signifies living in accordance with the standards Jesus was instructing in the Sermon on the Mount: love, fairness, mercy, purity of heart. When we establish this as our priority, Jesus assures that all these things, our material requirements, will be furnished. Jesus brought this portion to a close with practical guidance. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. This isn't a summons to recklessness or an absence of planning. Rather, it represents an invitation to exist in the here and now, placing confidence in God one day at a time. Jesus was prompting his followers not to be immobilized by concern about what lies ahead, but to place confidence in God's daily provision. Throughout this portion of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus was confronting his audience to a fundamental change in outlook. He was summoning them to place confidence in God in a manner that would change their priorities and liberate them from the concern that so frequently goes along with the pursuit of material security. This instruction from Jesus continues to confront us in the present day. In a world that frequently evaluates worth and achievement in material terms, Jesus' statements summon us to a different vision, a vision focused on God's kingdom and assured of his provision. In the closing segment of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tackled practical matters of judgment and taking action. He provided direction on how to exist wisely in the world, reaching decisions that mirror the principles of God's kingdom. Jesus started this portion with a caution against rash judgment. In Matthew 7:1-5, he stated, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." This instruction doesn't prohibit all varieties of judgment or discernment. Rather, Jesus cautions against a fault-finding and condemning disposition toward others. He summons his followers to a truthful self-assessment before identifying the shortcomings of others. Subsequently, Jesus provided encouragement for continuing in prayer. In Matthew 7:7-11, he stated, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And to the one who knocks the door will be opened. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him?" This instruction highlights God's goodness and promotes confidence in his readiness to answer our prayers. Jesus advocates for a disposition of continuance and assurance in prayer. Jesus then offered what is recognized as the Golden Rule. In Matthew 7:12, he said, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets." This declaration encapsulates much of Jesus' moral instruction and furnishes a practical standard to direct our exchanges with others. Subsequently, Jesus addressed the restricted path that guides to life. In Matthew 7:13-14, he stated, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. This instruction highlights that following Jesus isn't the simple or well-liked path. It demands dedication and may include hardships, but it represents the path that guides to genuine life. Jesus then cautioned about deceptive prophets. In Matthew 7:15-20, he said, "Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them." This instruction furnishes a practical standard for distinguishing between genuine and deceptive spiritual guides. Observe their fruit, that is, the outcomes of their existence and instructions. Jesus brought the Sermon on the Mount to a close with a compelling parable concerning the significance of implementing his instructions in practice. In Matthew 7:24-27, he stated, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." This parable highlights that it's insufficient to merely hear Jesus' instructions. We must implement them in our existence. Genuine wisdom, in accordance with Jesus, is existing in accordance with his statements. The Sermon on the Mount concludes with an observation on the effect of Jesus' instructions. Matthew 7:28-29 tells us, "When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority, and not as their teachers of the law." Dear viewer, we have just traveled through the remarkable Sermon on the Mount, one of Jesus Christ's most meaningful and life-changing instructions. We've witnessed how Jesus confronted traditional concepts of happiness, fairness, and spirituality, offering a fundamentally new vision of God's kingdom. We'd be delighted to receive your reflections and personal experiences. How do these instructions from Jesus affect you? Which segments of the Sermon on the Mount do you discover most demanding or uplifting? Express your reflections in the comments below. And if you discovered this video worthwhile, why not pass it along to friends and family members who might also gain from these life-changing instructions? Together, we can distribute the compelling message of the Sermon on the Mount and create a positive impact in our world. Keep in mind, the path Jesus summons us to travel may be restricted and demanding, but it's the path that guides to genuine and plentiful life. May we all possess the bravery to construct our existence on the firm rock of Jesus' instructions. Until the next video, may the grace and peace of God remain with you as you pursue to live out the standards of the kingdom in your everyday existence. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave your comments. See you next time.